Okay, so streaming start. Is it working? Is it working? Hello? There it is. Okay, good. Make sure it's doing better than it did last week. All right. So we're back in the War of 1898. And since we kind of had to end things halfway through, I'll briefly go over this slide again, and then we'll get into the rest of the war. Which, I mean, honestly, this first half of it is really just America, or the American press, trying to get the public on the side of going into the war to begin with. The New York Journal, New York Post, or sorry, New York World, providing this coverage of Spanish atrocities, often making things up just to get more readership. This became known as yellow journalism, largely, as I said, due to the color of the paper that was used because it was the cheapest paper they could get their hands on. But the actual spark that caused America to go to war was the destruction of the Maine and Havana Harbor, which, as I said, was likely due to either a static discharge or some idiot smoking in the powder room, which, you know, caused the whole ship to explode, because that's how ships were designed back then. You just put all your munitions in a single room and hope for the best. But it should be mentioned, you guys want to carry on the conversation, take it outside, please. Great. And it should be mentioned, though Spain was already losing, the proclamation for the war stated that Cuba should be independent, but only when pacified, and that would be the attitude going forward. This is about the Philippines. We'll actually talk about that in greater detail a little bit later. There's a video I want to show you guys about the Philippines, but we're going to have to wait till the end of the class because I don't want my video to get copyright strike. So we're going to have to wait till the end, and I'll have to stop the recording and show you guys, and then just give my online class the link for it, because it's a real good video, both on what the Philippine War was actually like and also some fun etymology. So yeah, the Philippine War was real bad. We'll get to that in a minute. Here's Spain. The Spanish brute adds mutilation to murder. I don't know what that's about because the ship exploded. There wasn't like Spanish Marines or whatever going out there cutting up the bodies. I don't know what that was about. Also, we fought in Guam for like a very little bit. There's Pulitzer and Hearst fighting over who gets to start the war. They're in these like baby dresses, because you know babies shit themselves, so no point putting them in pants. And a lot of times they will be made out of just like whatever cloth was around, and sometimes you would just make them out of newspaper. I mean, that was just the thing that they did during that day. So here they are both in the yellow newspaper that they wrote on, that their journalism was done on. So you have them fighting over who gets to start the war like a couple of petulant children. The last blow. No longer will brutal Spain be supported by outraged colonies, despite the majority of these colonies, well, actually all of these colonies, at least for a little while, then being immediately controlled by America. You've got Cuba, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico. I don't see Guam. I just ignore Guam, I guess. Some little doodad here. To hell with Spain, remember the Maine. I showed you guys all this last time. The Maine exploding. Uncle Sam punching Spain in the mouth, I guess. And the remains of the Maine, which, as I said, powder room explosion. All right. So on to the rest of the war. Again, this war wasn't, the war with Spain itself wasn't a big deal. At least as far as like the fighting of it. But what it symbolized, what it stood for was a big deal. So going to war with Spain and taking over these colonies, McKinley did signal these imperialistic notions that had been building since, well, the start of the chapter. And then he also immediately, well, not immediately, but not long after the war started, he annexed Hawaii. Like the white plantation owners who had taken Hawaii in a coup had wanted. So now Hawaii is a state. Well, not a state, it was a territory for a little while and then eventually a state. And it was good that the rebels had already done all the work because we didn't have much of a standing army, only about 30,000 men, which was smaller than even the rebel forces. McKinley did mobilize 200,000 National Guard, various volunteers such as Roosevelt's Rough Riders. Hey, remember them? Also, like the Spanish, we weren't really suited for fighting in the jungles of Cuba. We hadn't had a proper war since, well, the Civil War. Not much supplies. The uniforms weren't suited for, as I said, the hot, humid climate. And also the disease in the jungle areas. I mean, you get mosquitoes, you have all sorts of fun tropical diseases. And boy, howdy, those fun tropical diseases did a number on the American troops. And also, because we're talking about America in like the 1890s, there was a whole lot of racism that actually well, I wouldn't say it almost upended the war, but it caused issues right at the start of the war. I'll just read here from the book. African American soldiers, who made up about 1/4 of the troops, encountered additional difficulties. As more and more black troops arrived in southern ports for deployment in Cuba, they faced increasingly hostile crowds, angered at the presence of armed African American men in uniform. In Tampa, Florida, where our troops gathered from all over the country to be transported to Cuba, racial tensions exploded on the afternoon of June 8th. Intoxicated white soldiers from Ohio grabbed a 2-year-old black boy from his mother and used him for target practice, shooting a bullet through his shirt sleeve. In retaliation, African-American soldiers stormed into the streets and exchanged gunfire with whites, leaving 3 whites and 27 black soldiers wounded. Reporting on the story of this riot, the Atlanta Constitution denounced the wild and demonic conduct of the black regulars because, of course, completely ignoring the behavior of the white troops that had prompted the whole scenario. Undaunted, the black troops went on to distinguish themselves in the Cuban battlefields. But, can't have any amount of anything without a little racism here in the lovely land of the free. And despite the troubles we were having, the war was over in 4 months, which the war was basically over before we even began, much like World War I. In the 4 months, 460 Americans died in combat. A good 5,000 died due to disease. So, more than 10 times as many died due to tropical diseases than actual, getting shot by the Spanish. The Secretary of State John Hay called the hostilities a splendid little war because, that was hardly anything. We lost less than 500 men in the actual war, and 5,000 to disease, but we don't count that. And as I mentioned, Spain ceded Puerto Rico and Guam to the U.S. and recognized the U.S. occupation of the Philippines, which we will get to. Because, the Philippines were a whole separate thing. Here's Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders. Again, Teddy Roosevelt being the only one with a horse. For those of you that were here for the video, the drunk history video. Again, the American troops fighting against the Spanish.
The people in the office told me to ask if we had a test for you.
What's that?
My test.
Oh, yes. Yep. I have a bunch of them. So I'm just take it in the testing center?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
He told me to come back.
Sure, that's fine.
I'm supposed to be 104.
Oh, I'm dumb. I've done that twice now.
That's what he said. He said, "You still have 102." He said, "I think you're supposed to be 104."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, I'm done. I printed out some extras because apparently I put them away at home or something.
Thank
I don't
you.
know. No problem. Okay. This one stands out to me because you have the American troops moving up on the Spanish, and you've got one dude up in the tower waving a flag behind Spanish lines. Dude's got some guts. Meanwhile, there's a guy fighting the Spanish in the tower while the other guy's waving the flag. It's come on, dude. I get the whole, morale boost, but get your priorities straight. I don't know what's happening with this guy here. I don't know if he's, getting out and, going onto the roof to leave, or if he's getting into the tower. There's a lot happening. Anyway, here's one of the black regiments because, of course they were segregated. Which I guess better to do that than have lynching happening on the battlefield. Jesus. Here's a picture I've shown you guys already, but it's back again. This is later, McKinley and Roosevelt. What is it? American flag has not been planted on foreign soil to acquire more territory, but for humanity's sake. Sure. We'll see about that. Let me know what you guys think about that when we get to the end of all this. And here we have John Bull, again, that's Britain. It's really most extraordinary what training will do. Why, only the other day I thought that the man unable to support himself. Here we have, Uncle Sam, the Philippines. Can't quite read that other one. Mandarin? Puerto Rico, Cuba, Hawaii, all these regions that have been exploited. So what happened to Cuba? So the Teller Amendment on the declaration of war on Spain and the subsequent aid for Cuba pledged to aid Cuba in its independence, but Cuban self-rule would only come after it was pacified, which again didn't just mean once we drive out the Spanish. It meant it needed to be pacified according to American ideals. So once again, late 1800s racism. Americans were blind to how much work the Cuban rebels had done, which is to say most of it. And also commanding officers were horrified at the number of black commanding officers among the rebel forces, because we already talked about that at the beginning of the Cuban independence to begin with, the Afro-Cubans that were a major part of the independence movement. Here we have a U.S. officer reporting to the New York Times, and he's talking about the Cubans, who again are the people that the Americans were going to save. So this is how he described them. The typical Cuban I encountered was a treacherous, lying, cowardly, thieving, worthless, half-breed mongrel born of a mongrel spawn of Spain, crossed upon the fetches of darkest Africa and of aboriginal America. And these were the ones we were supposedly working with, not like the ones we were trying to make look like animals so that we could conquer them. So U.S. officials felt that the Cubans couldn't rule themselves, so it remained under military occupation until 1902. Cuba had to adopt a constitution based on the U.S. Constitution because that's how we spread our freedom, by making other countries model their governments after our governments. But this wasn't just like, hey, you make a constitution like ours and you get your own country. Well, not quite. The Platt Amendment of 1901 limited Cuban sovereignty. Cuba couldn't sign foreign treaties without consent from the U.S. America could intervene in Cuba to preserve independence, remove threats to economic stability, and also we got Guantanamo Bay, which was a totally normal, average, legitimate naval base where nothing bad ever happens. Apparently Ron DeSantis used to work at Guantanamo Bay, just saying. Found that out. So the occupation ended in 1901, but as we say, Cuba was not independent. The United States established Cuba as a protectorate, allowing for economic exploitation, because that's how we rolled. And that's why Cuba became communist the moment they got the chance, because they're like, we don't like to be exploited by another country. This pisses us off. This is the whole reason we had our independence movement. And this other country rolls in and just like takes us over immediately. This is not what we wanted. And then after, during the Cold War, and Russia's like, hey, if you go communist, we'll help you out. We're like, well, I guess that's the best we can do. So yeah, that's why all that happened. So here's the Army of Occupation entering Havana. That's what you call the liberators during an independence movement, occupiers. It's another weird little cartoon here. God, I didn't realize what is happening in McKinley's hand. Oh no. Oh no, I'll never look at it the same way again. I mean, Uncle Sam's hands are weird too, but what is this necromorph hand on that table here? Oh no. Anyway, another one of these weird cartoons of like, Uncle Sam getting these food items of imperialism. This is when McKinley was still alive. Like, this war ended so quickly. Here's another weird cartoon of Roosevelt and his policies being a mini Roosevelt, and I don't know why he's got like the long cat body. Look, why is the baby's body that long? Taft's in a maid outfit for reasons, and they've got Wilson as like a chauffeur. Here's another Puck cover. The First Steps Alone. Here we have the U.S. Protectorate of Cuba, Cuba being seen as a child, which again was just like the argument of the day is, well, if they're not a white Anglo-Saxon nation, then they're clearly children and have to be taken care of by outside nations. And by taken care of, I mean completely exploited. Because, they totally didn't do their war on their own for 4 years before we went in and were there for 4 months and, just died of disease. Prosperity at home, prestige abroad. McKinley resting on his laurels for the, 9 months he was alive. Here again, save me from my friends. You've got Cuba and the Cuban insurgents, the rebels that were seen as worse for Cuba than even Spain. So America had to come in and save the day because that's what America does, whether people want us there or not. Speaking of whether people want us there or not, the Philippine War, because hoo boy. Before we'd even invaded Cuba, we'd already struck a major blow against Spain. Over in the Pacific, under the command of Commodore George Dewey, the Spanish flotilla in Manila Bay was attacked and completely destroyed May 1st, 1898, killing nearly 400 Spanish sailors and leaving only 8 Americans with minor injuries. That's what you call a clean sweep. After 2.5 months, American forces invaded Manila and the Spanish forces surrendered. Manila being the capital of the Philippines, so just FYI. Immediately, imperialists wanted to annex the Philippines because it's literally just south of China, and the big thing at the time was let's just exploit the hell out of China until the whole empire falls apart. Which, if you know anything about ancient Chinese history, that's kind of a pattern. Is China becomes one big empire, and then it falls into a bunch of little kingdoms, and then they form slightly larger kingdoms, and they fight each other for a few hundred years, and they eventually unite for a little while, and then the cycle starts over. Of course, we had the whole racial reasoning. Filipino people could not govern themselves. Indiana Senator Albert Beveridge. We must never forget that in dealing with the Filipinos, we deal with children because, senators from Indiana are ones you listen to. However, not everybody in America was on board with this blatant imperialism. We had people from as far and wide as Andrew Carnegie, thank you, Jane Addams, Mark Twain, all who created the And labor organizer Samuel Gompers, who we haven't talked about, and the book mentions here and there, but never enough for me to actually put in the notes, so don't worry about him. But you guys should know the rest of them. We've talked about Andrew Carnegie for like an entire chapter. Jane Addams was a major part of the previous chapter, and I mean, we should all know Mark Twain, I hope. Anyway, they all joined together under the Anti-Imperialist League. Now, while they all had the same basic idea of like, you know, we don't like imperialism because reasons, their reasons tended to be different. Some of the arguments were that it violated America's anti-colonialist heritage because, I mean, we were colonies and we broke away from an empire. So why are we becoming an empire and creating colonies? Because that's, like, we literally freed ourselves from a colonial empire. So why are we becoming one? Others, so I would say probably Andrew Carnegie, had economic concerns that we were, you know, stretching ourselves too thin, that this wasn't going to be economically sound, and yada yada. Also, and this is the big thing that once we get to the end of the class, or near the end of class, we'll give it a little bit longer before we show the video. The Filipinos fought back, and they fought back hard. This resulted in mass atrocities. Some 200,000 Filipino civilians died between 1899 and 1902. By July 1901, the Philippines were an American holding, but, and this is something taken from the video, and considering the history that follows it, I'm willing to go with what the guy in the video says. The Philippine War didn't really end until 1913. This was, until Afghanistan, our longest war. And once again, we were in a place where the people didn't want us there. We're like, we're here to help you. And we start shooting civilians. It's like, yeah, we sure are there to help them. I'll let the video go into greater detail about that. But after the 1901, the war's over, mission accomplished, you know, that whole thing. There were still groups that were aggressively fighting back, to the point that the M1911 pistol was like a standard issue because these guys would just like come out of the woods with their bolo knives and take down American soldiers, and it was like they would just take shots and keep going. So they had to issue the soldiers a sidearm that would kill you quickly. That's where you get the M1911. So here's the destruction of the Spanish flotilla at Manila Bay, which again, 8 American sailors were slightly injured. I don't know if maybe they like got overheated from the cannons firing, or maybe got some dust in their eyes or something. Like, I mean, if there's cannonballs going around, I don't know how you get injured minor. Or maybe like a cannonball hit nearby and they got some like some shrapnel or something. This is what the Philippine Wars look like. Philippine War looked like. And yeah, it was like Vietnam, but apparently even more brutal, because there were several islands where American commanders would just tell their troops to kill any male old enough to hold a gun, which was basically anyone 10 and up. Just wipe them out. So here we have the Senate Philippine bill. We've got the bad Filipino. There's the with the bolo knife, and the good Filipino. You know, the ones that have agreed to become civilized, according to the Americans. Oh yeah, and this is a picture that's shown in the video. Lots of mass graves, because there was lots of mass killing. Yeah, the Philippines, the Filipinos still don't like Americans very much. Oh right, we also did old-fashioned torture methods. This is an old Chinese torture method. It's like waterboarding, but more direct. Basically, they'd either break or they'd drown. They also had early Maxim machine guns, so any fortified locations that were attacked by Filipino rebels were, the rebels were usually gunned down very quickly. So it wasn't like the war in Cuba where the Spanish and the Cubans were pretty matched in terms of technology. The Philippines, they're calling them the Targals here. I guess this is one of the many groups, or Toggles, rather. Repulsed with great slaughter. In one yard in which a photograph was taken, there were found no less than 20 dead. Garrote machine has an official record of killing 21 men, or they just tighten it till it crushes your throat. Because, you know, that's a nice, swift way of executing somebody. Oh, again, this one is briefly shown in the video, but I want to read this one out. Lucky Filipinos. It appears the Filipinos have lost confidence in Americans. Do the benighted wretches fail to realize what we have accomplished in their lands? We may have burnt certain villages, destroyed considerable property, and incidentally slaughtered a few thousand of their sons and brothers, husbands and fathers, etc. But what do they expect? Are we to transport an army more than halfway around the world merely to listen to peace propositions? Not much. And look at Manila. 2 years ago, the main street of Manila did not have a single saloon. Now there are 13 on this one street. And they complained that drunken American soldiers insult the native women. Insult was the euphemism for worse things. What do they expect from a drunken soldier anyway? Progress is now on these islands. She may be red-handed and at times drunk, but she is there for business. And here you have, an American soldier gunning down a village. So, with that in mind, let's move on to the next section. More Theodore Roosevelt, because obviously. So McKinley was assassinated in 1901, right at the, quote, end of the Filipino War. Teddy Roosevelt took over. He believed in using power to secure American interests to the point of force if necessary. I mentioned that, I believe last time we had that picture of the Uncle Sam on that car with the cannon in front, and it had force if necessary written over it. We've talked about Mahan a couple of times, so there he is again. Yay, being back here with the shop glasses. Considered a canal across Central America, give more access to the Atlantic and Pacific. So this is the whole Panama Canal thing. So first we signed the Hay-Ponchfort Treaty with Britain to give America the right to build the canal because, you know, Britain's always got access to everything. So we had to make sure we had permission from Britain. We selected Panama because France had already built a little bit of a canal there. Two-fifths of a canal? Yeah. But then they ran out of money and sold us what they had for $40 million. France was really good at building stuff, and they're running out of money. They did that with the Suez Canal. They did that with the Vietnam War. Maybe we shouldn't have stepped in there. You know, France. So after signing a treaty with Britain, or an agreement with Britain, Britain, and buying the actual canal off of France, we also needed to negotiate with Colombia because they actually owned the land. Panama wasn't a sovereign nation at the time. That land belonged to Colombia. So we reached a favorable agreement, but then the Colombian government decided not to ratify it. They realized how important this canal was to the United States. So they decided to sit on their hands and force the United States to give them a better deal because they could. However, in 1903, there just so happened to be a pro-American uprising in Panama. Just so happened to be this big uprising in Panama that was for America. And the United States sent in warships to blockade the port so that Colombia couldn't send in their own troops to stop the uprising. And thus Panama became independent, and America recognized their sovereignty, thus making them an official country. And then they signed a treaty with Panama to, you know, let the U.S. build a canal, exercise power and authority, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in my technology course, we'd probably talk about the canal and its details for the rest of the class, because it's a whole big deal. I've got a bunch of pictures for it, because we have to talk about the canal a little bit. It's a huge thing. It was finished in 1914. It was and still is a technological wonder. These canals were really fascinating. And especially when it came to this event, Roosevelt felt confident enough to declare a Roosevelt Corollary on top of the Monroe Doctrine. If you don't recall, the Monroe Doctrine declared that the United States would stay out of European affairs as long as European powers stayed out of affairs in the Western Hemisphere, which is to say the Americas. This Roosevelt Corollary, which I don't think was actually like written down, it was just something that Roosevelt said. But basically, the U.S. had the right to intervene with anything that was going on in the Western Hemisphere. If there was something that was happening in Central or South America that would affect America economically or whatever, America had the right to go in and do whatever they felt was necessary. Obviously, we couldn't get involved in Canada because that was a big piece of Britain's empire, and we didn't feel like pissing off Britain at the time. This isn't the Fallout universe where we just annex Canada for shits and giggles. At least not yet. So we got a bunch of these weird, like, giant Teddy Roosevelt images from this thing. So we got Teddy Roosevelt coming in and, blockading the port and keeping Colombia out. There's Panama with its little tiny cannon to fight off Colombia, and then there's Roosevelt rolling in with a massive ship. There was clearly lots of intrigue. The French canal stock, concessions to the United States, the Panama Republic, all this other stuff going on. This weird, I keep forgetting the dude's name. Paul Bunyan. This Paul Bunyan-esque Teddy Roosevelt, just like digging the canal on his own. Panama bus, running over international law, Colombian protests, etc. There's another giant Teddy Roosevelt. We do actually have a human-sized Teddy Roosevelt sitting in one of the big dirt movers, actually down in the Panama Canal. And if you want to actually see the canal being built, here's a neat image. You got some basic steam locomotives, some like steam shovels off to the sides there, digging stuff. Lots of standing water, which meant lots of mosquitoes and lots of disease. A lot of people died of malaria building this thing. A lot of people died building the Panama Canal. Here it is later in construction. You've got most of the walls. You've got the locks being built. It's really weird seeing a canal without water in it, in like the locks in a state of construction. It's wild that this stuff's being built like in 1900. You can see the makeshift railway running down the middle. And here it is in business. Ships go in. The locks close behind them. The water fills up so that they're at the level of the lake there that's in the middle, and they move along to the next set of locks. Speaking of more imperialism, China, because hoo boy, we had to get involved there. So we're pretty much in charge of Central and South America at this point, or at least as much as we wanted to be, and we felt like anything else we needed to, we could just go in and do stuff. There were no real powers in Central and South America to contend with. So again, the major target was China. There was the huge population there for business. We wanted an open door policy, and as we said, most of Europe already had access to the two opium wars. We had kind of gotten involved in the second one, but our big in was during the nationalistic uprising known as the Boxer Rebellion. The Chinese people were getting tired of the Qing dynasty just kowtowing to the Western powers, and would meet up in these secret martial arts societies and had an uprising and probably would have overthrown the dynasty. And then the European powers and America came in and brutally put down this uprising, and then demanded more concessions from China. Oh, I haven't told you guys about those treaty ports yet. I told my European class about it. So, treaty ports. Before all this, Europeans and Americans couldn't really do much trading beyond just we gave them money and they gave us the stuff we wanted. We weren't trading them goods for goods. But with the treaty ports, basically within these certain ports, Chinese law didn't apply. So if say an American sailor got drunk and got in a fight with a Chinese man and killed him in the fight, Chinese law wouldn't apply. And he would be subject to American law. And because racism, he probably wouldn't even get in trouble. And that's the most even thing I could think about. Two men getting in a fight and one getting killed in the fight. It would probably be a lot more predatory than that. People getting drunk and going into a foreign port and harassing the people. We also had the Russian invasion of China's province of Manchuria, which Japan saw as being their right to take over. So Russia invaded a Chinese province and Japan attacked Russia over it, which led to the Russo-Japanese War. And Japan was beating the crap out of Russia. And eventually Roosevelt had to step in and be like, hey, y'all, we should have peace, mostly because I don't want Japan to just completely overrun Russia because of racism. Or as he put it, this could cause a real shifting of equilibrium as far as the white races are concerned. Because even though, again, if you take my European history course, most of the history of Europe is being concerned about Russian expansion. The idea of an Eastern power expanding against Russia was far more terrifying. Anyway, he called a peace conference in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Japan was given Korea and parts of Manchuria, but had to support the open door policy. Roosevelt sent 16 battleships around the world in a show of force, et cetera, et cetera. Taft did the dollars for bullets policy, where he encouraged bankers to invest in stuff rather than sending warships around. This dollar diplomacy doubled American investments in the Caribbean and Central America. However, this didn't mean that all was completely peaceful, because in 1909, American fruit and mining companies installed a sympathetic government in Nicaragua, which led to a rebellion, which led to U.S. troops being stationed in Nicaragua for the next 25 years, because, of course, we had businesses that just wanted to take over whole countries. Like they did in Hawaii. Here's Collier's magazine, even though that's the war in China, even though that's clearly on a Japanese flag. But, it's all the same to them. Here is an image I've shown in my European history course. You've got the various powers fighting over the dead Chinese dragon. Japan, Italy, Austria, Russia. The lion is clearly England, Germany. The rooster is France, and then, of course, the American eagle on the back. I like that they didn't they didn't label the lion. You know, it's clearly England. I feel like they didn't need to label the bear either, because that's obviously Russia. I mean, the hat alone, it's the Russian Orthodox, like, that's Russia. But I mean, even without the hat, it's a bear, it's Russia. Come on, guys. We know what that is. And obviously the terrifying two-headed buzzard eagle thing here is Austria, but that's a bit more of a deep cut. Here's one that I thought I had in my European history course, so for those of you who are in my European history course as well, here's a weird one. It's basically this, but rather than everybody's an animal fighting over a dragon, it's everybody's a chicken sitting on an egg. Look at England. England's having a great time. And America's like supposedly not involved, but we were totally involved. We were as involved as anybody else. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness under treaty rights. Yeah. Peace or war, the dragon's choice. Sure. There again is Russia and Japan having their dust up. I don't know why France is the one there in the back. I don't know why France looks like a leprechaun? And there's the peace treaty. Let us have peace. Like, I didn't even see the us. Anyway, Great White Fleet. There's a Monroe Doctrine. Okay, was there not? Oh, no, I guess not. Okay, so we have a little bit of time. I'm going to show you guys the video. So for you online folks, I'm going to end the stream. And just post the thing online.